And as we continue our night of worship, the book of 1 Chronicles says, "Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the peoples. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and he is to be feared above all gods. For the gods of the people are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and joy are in his place. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice, and let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." I invite you to stand as we continue our worship together this evening and sing Hallelujah, one Savior.
What a Friend We Have in Jesus was written in 1855. Joseph Scriven watched in shock as the body of his fiancée was pulled from the lake. Their wedding had been planned for the next day. Reeling from the tragedy, he made up his mind to immigrate to America. Packing up his belongings in Dublin, Ireland, he sailed for Canada, leaving his mother behind. He was about 25 years old. 10 years later, in 1855, he received word that his mother was facing a crisis. Joseph wrote this poem and sent it to her. Miss Scriven evidently gave a copy to a friend who had it published anonymously, and it quickly became a popular hymn, though no one knew who had written it. Meanwhile, Joseph fell in love again, but tragedy struck a second time when his bride, Eliza Catherine Roach, contracted tuberculosis and died in 1860 before their wedding could take place. To escape his sorrow, Joseph poured himself into ministry, doing charity work for the Plymouth Brethren and preaching among the Baptists. He lived a simple, obscure life in Port Hope, Canada, cutting firewood for widows, giving away clothes and money to those in need. He was described as a man of short stature with iron gray hair, close-cropped beard, and light blue eyes that sparkled when he talked. Ira Sankey later wrote, "Until a short time before his death, it was not known that he had a poetic gift. A neighbor sitting with him in his illness happened upon a manuscript copy of What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Reading it with great delight and questioning Mr. Scriven about it, he said that he had composed it for his mother to comfort her in a time of special sorrow, not intending that anyone else should see it. Sometime later, when another Port Hope neighbor asked him if it was true that he composed the hymn, his reply was, 'The Lord and I did it between us.'"
Please stand as we continue our evening of worship, and we're going to sing the song that Chelsea just talked to us about. What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sin and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer.
Coming Back to the Heart of Worship by Mike Pilavachi. Since it began, meeting in school halls with a PA that packed into the trunk of a Cavalier, Soul survivor Watford has always given plenty of time over to worshiping through music. Over the years, people have poured out their hearts to God through it, and there have been plenty of examples of great things happening as a result. However, in the autumn of '96, we realized that something was up with our worship. At first, it was difficult to put our finger on the problem. On the surface, everything was just fine. Many of the musicians had worked out how to tune their instruments, and the sound engineers were getting out of bed on time. Each service contained a block of songs that focused on the cross and gave people the chance to get down to business with God. To make this easier, the music was up to date, the chairs had disappeared, and the lights were low. What a better atmosphere for young people to worship God. Yet, we seemed to have lost the spark. We seemed to be going through the motions, but I noticed that although we were singing the songs, our hearts were far from Him. Was it Matt Redman's fault? I listened. He wasn't singing any more duff notes than usual. Then it clicked. We had become connoisseurs of worship instead of participants of it. In our hearts, we were giving the worship marks out of 10. Not that song again. I can't hear the bass. I like the way she sings. We had made the band the performers of worship, and ourselves the audience. We had forgotten that we are all the performers of worship and that God is the audience. We had forgotten that sacrifice is central to biblical worship. In the Old Testament, whenever the people of Israel gathered to worship, they sacrificed a lamb or other animal. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, when King Solomon and the people gathered to dedicate the new temple to the Lord, Solomon sacrificed 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. Now that's what I call a barbecue. The passage says that the glory of the Lord fell on the people, and they prostrated themselves on the pavement and worshiped. In fact, the presence of God was so tangible that for a while, even the priests could not perform their duties. We don't need to sacrifice sheep and goats today, and certainly no sacrifice on our part can earn God's forgiveness or our salvation. The one perfect sacrifice of Jesus on the cross has done that for all time. Yet we are called to bring sacrifices in worship. We are called to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. This is our spiritual act of worship. We are called to offer our sacrifice of praise. We were challenged to ask ourselves individually, when I come through the door of the church, what am I bringing as my contribution to the worship? The truth came to us. Worship is not a spectator sport. It is not a product molded by the taste of the consumers. It is not about what we can get out of it. It is all about God. We needed to take drastic action. For a while, in order to truly learn this lesson, we banned the band. We sacked Redman. Then we sat around in circles and said that if no one brought a sacrifice of praise, we would spend the meeting in silence. At the beginning, we virtually did. It was a very painful process. We were learning again not to rely on the music. After a while, we began to have some very sweet times of worship. We all began to bring our prayers, our readings, our prophecies, our thanksgiving, our praises, and our songs. Someone would start a song a cappella, and we would all join in. Then someone else would take it on to another song. The excitement came back. We were not having church. We were once again meeting with God. With all the comforts stripped away, we worshiped from the heart. When we had learned our lesson, we brought the band back. It was at this point that Matt began to sing the song he had written out of his experience. I wept as we sang it for the first time. The words expressed exactly what was going on. When the music fades, all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within. Through the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it when it's all about you, Jesus. King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. Though I'm weak and poor, all I have is yours, every single breath.
As you're in your seats this evening, let's think about the words to this song as we continue our worship and we sing together. When the music fades quietly come, longing just to breathe something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made. When it's all about you,
She was an embittered woman, Charlotte Elliott of Brighton, England. Her health was broken, and her disability had hardened her. If God loved me, she muttered, he would not have treated me this way. Hoping to help her, a Swiss minister, Dr. Caesar Milan, visited the Elliots on May 9th, 1822. Over dinner, Charlotte lost her temper and railed against God and family in a violent outburst. Her embarrassed family left the room, and Dr. Milan was left alone with her. "You are tired of yourself, aren't you?" he asked. "You are holding on to your hate and anger because you have nothing else in the world to cling to. Consequently, you have become sour, bitter, and resentful." "What is your cure?" asked Charlotte. "The faith you are trying to despise." As they talked, Charlotte asked, "If I wanted to become a Christian and to share the peace and joy you possess," she finally asked, "what would I do?" "You would give yourself to God just as you are now, with your fightings and fears, hates and loves, pride and shame. I would come to God just as I am. Is that right?" Charlotte did come just as she was, and her heart was changed that day. As time passed, she found and claimed John 6:37 as a special verse for her. "He who comes to me, I will in no means cast out." Years later, her brother, Reverend Henry Elliott, was raising funds for a school for the children of clergymen. Charlotte wrote a poem, and it was printed and sold across England. The leaflet said, "Sold for the benefit of St. Margaret's Hall, Brighton. Him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out." Underneath was Charlotte's poem, which has since become the most famous invitational hymn in history. Charlotte lived to be 82 and wrote about 150 hymns, though she never enjoyed good health. As her loved ones sifted through her papers after her death, they found over 1,000 letters she had kept in which people expressed their gratitude for the way this hymn had touched their lives.
As we sing this hymn this evening, look at the lyrics as you sing them, and may they become real to you, just as I am, without one plea, that thy blood was shed for me. And there's a chorus that we're going to sing with this, and I invite you to pay attention to those lyrics as well. "I come broken to be mended, I come wounded to be healed, I come desperate to be rescued, I come empty to be filled." Come on, let's stand together and sing this evening, "Just as I am."
Oh Perhaps the most famous of our hymn stories involves the incredible tragedy that prompted Horatio Spafford to write the immortal hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul." In the first volume of Then Sings My Soul, we read this: "When the Great Chicago Fire consumed the Windy City in 1871, Horatio G. Spafford, an attorney heavily invested in real estate, lost a fortune. About that time, his only son, aged 4, succumbed to scarlet fever. Horatio drowned his grief in work, pouring himself into rebuilding the city and assisting the 100,000 who had been left homeless. In November of 1873, he decided to take his wife and daughters to Europe. Horatio was close to D.L. Moody and Ira Sankey, and he wanted to visit their evangelistic meetings in England and then enjoy a vacation. When an urgent matter detained Horatio in New York, he decided to send his wife Anna and their 4 daughters, Maggie, Tanetta, Annie, and Bessie, on ahead. As he saw them settled into a cabin aboard the luxurious French liner Ville de Havre, an unease filled his mind, and he moved them to a room closer to the bow of the ship. Then he said goodbye, promising to join them soon. During the small hours of November 22nd, 1873, as the Ville de Havre glided over smooth seas, the passengers were jolted from their bunks. The ship had collided with an iron sailing vessel, and water poured in like Niagara. The Ville de Havre tilted dangerously. Screams, prayers, and oaths merged into a nightmare of unmeasured terror. Passengers clung to posts, tumbled through darkness, and were swept away by powerful currents of icy ocean. Loved ones fell from each other's grasp and disappeared into foaming blackness. Within 2 hours, the mighty ship vanished beneath the waters. The 226 fatalities included Maggie, Tanetta, Annie, and Bessie. Miss Spafford was found nearly unconscious, clinging to a piece of the wreckage. When the 47 survivors landed in Cardiff, Wales, she cabled her husband, "Saved alone." Horatio immediately booked passage to join his wife. En route, on a cold December night, the captain called him aside and said, "I believe we are now passing over the place where the Ville de Havre went down." Spafford went to his cabin, but found it hard to sleep. He said to himself, "It is well, the will of God be done." He later wrote his famous hymn based on those words.
Let's stand together and sing those words. It is well with my soul.
Oh,
this evening. Amen? Amen. It has been wonderful worshiping the Lord with you this evening. We're going to sing one more song together. How great thou art, O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the world thy hands have made. How great thou art. Let's sing together.